Hello and welcome to this GCSE AQA 91 Business Paper 2 walkthrough. This video is designed to help you with your last minute revision in preparation for your exam tomorrow, which is Monday the 13th of June. We're going to be looking at some core content based on the advanced information and the specification, and also looking at the different sections that you'll see in the exam paper, as well as focus on exam technique. So let's start off with an overview of paper 2. So paper 2 is based on business in the real world, influences on business, so 3.1 and 3.2 from the specification, as well as marketing and finance, so that's 3.5 and 3.6. So there is no questions going to be asked on HR or operations this time. So the case studies included in the paper will be based on businesses operating in local, national and global contexts, so they can be of any size. So paper 2 is very similar in terms of the structure to paper 1. It will be 1 hour 45 minutes and there will be 90 marks available. The paper is worth 50% of the GCSE marks. So in terms of the sections, we've got section A where there's no case study, and this seems to be set now that there will be 20 marks available for section A. However, in terms of section B and C, the number of marks available tends to fluctuate, so approximately 35 marks for each, but that can change. So there will be one business context in section B and a different business context in section C. In section C, the paper will end with the 12-mark synoptic question. So we're going to start off with some multiple choice questions, because when you open your paper tomorrow, you will be faced with 6 multiple choice questions, which should be quite straightforward. They're assessing knowledge only. So let's take a look at these 2 questions. So the first one, which of the following is the correct formula to calculate the gross profit margin? So have a look at the different options. You can pause the video if you would like to and then restart when you're ready. So look at each option carefully and then decide which you think is the right answer. So let's take a look at the answer, and it is D. The gross profit margin is calculated by gross profits over sales revenue times 100. An important formula to remember, because this calculation is mentioned in the advanced information, not only under the specification content, but also under the quantitative skills in business section of the advanced information. So before we move on, let's just recap some key points linked to multiple choice questions. As I mentioned, the paper will start with 6 MCQs, and these questions assess knowledge only. These questions may take a number of different forms, such as a definition. So you may see 4 different definitions of key terms, and you need to select the definition that best reflects the key term in the question. The MCQ may link to a benefit or drawback of a key topic area, may ask you about a key fact, or a formula. We've also seen in the past where a break-even diagram has been included in a MCQ. This question wasn't answered particularly well by students, so be prepared for a break-even diagram to be included this time, where you may have to identify a particular line that is shown on the graph. MCQs are computer marked. You need to fill in a circle alongside the appropriate answer that you think is correct. If you change your mind, put a cross through your original answer, and if you change your mind again and you want to go back to your first answer, then you just put a circle around the box. All those instructions are included at the start of your exam paper, but if you know that information now, it will just save you time in the exam if you do want to change your mind, because you know those instructions beforehand. Always guess if you're unsure. There's a 1 in 4 chance of getting the answer correct, so make sure you always guess. So we're going to complete a couple of Give Me 2 activities, and you've got 30 seconds to come up with 2 examples of qualitative primary market research techniques or methods. So the time it takes for the music to stop. So good luck. So hopefully you've had enough time to come up with 2 examples, and we'll take a look at the answers on the next slide. So 2 examples of qualitative primary market research methods. We have focus groups, and remember those are small groups of people coming together to talk about a new product, for example, so you're getting in-depth research from that particular group, so qualitative market research, and interviews would be the second example. So the 2 lines that must be drawn on a break-even diagram or chart or graph, they're all the same thing. In order to calculate the break-even point are total revenue and total costs. Where those 2 lines cross, that is the break-even point, and you need to then go down from that point to the x-axis or the horizontal axis, and that will tell you on the graph how many units the business needs to sell in order to break even. And break even just means the point where the business is not making a profit or loss. Now, some GCSE exam boards require students to be able to calculate break even using a formula. You don't need to do that for AQA. All you need to be able to do is identify the break-even level of output and the margin of safety from a break-even chart. So the margin of safety, just to recap that, is the difference between the current output and the break-even point. So a really crucial topic here, so make sure you have a look at a break-even diagram before tomorrow. So the reason why I've given you a couple of these activities to complete is that in section A, you may be asked to identify 2 features or examples or benefits or drawbacks of a particular topic area. So if you are asked to do that, there weren't any of that type of questions this time in section A for paper 1, but then that doesn't mean it won't happen for paper 2. There is no need to write in full sentences. One word or a short phrase is usually enough to allow the examiner to award each mark. However, in this type of question, be careful not to repeat yourself or include similar points in your responses, because if they're too similar, you may end up with just getting 1 mark out of the 2. So well done if you've got those 2 activities correct. In section A, again, you are going to be asked to complete some explain questions. So you'll have 6 multiple choice questions. You may have an identify question or a couple of identify questions, as I mentioned on the previous slide, and then you will get some explain questions, which will be worth 2 marks. So we're going to look at this question here to help you get practiced ready for tomorrow. Explain one benefit to a business of having an integrated marketing mix. So this topic area is included on the advanced information. So pause the video now and have a think about this particular question and the response that you might include if it featured in your exam paper. Remember, you're just looking for a point and a development of that point. So another sentence or a connective which is linking 2 parts of a sentence together to show that you understand the point that you have made. So we're looking at integrated marketing mix. Make sure you show distinct understanding of that particular topic area in your response. So if you'd like to pause the video, then you can restart when you are ready. So let's take a look at a suggested response, and you can compare it with your own ideas if you've written down any at home or you've managed to have a think about this question. So we have the marketing mix will make sense to customers as all 4 elements of the marketing mix will work together. It's logical. Therefore, you haven't got a luxury branded designer product that is priced at a very low price, because that wouldn't make sense. It will make sense to customers if the marketing mix is integrated. As a result, you've got a connective here. The business may generate more sales compared to rival products. So that answer would gain 2 marks. It answers the question set, it's logical, and it is explaining one benefit. So it's meeting the demands of the question. So if you have something similar, well done. So one last explain question for you to complete. Now this time it's a 4-mark explain question, and it replicates the type of question that you will see at the end of section A. So you can answer it or you can complete it exactly in the same way as you would as a 2-mark explain question in section A. However, the last question always asks for 2, so 2 benefits or 2 reasons or 2 ways. So this question is asking for explain 2 reasons why a business would draw up a business plan, a really, really crucial topic area in the specification. It's commonly assessed, it's in the advanced information. You need to make sure you revise this topic area carefully. So that's why we're including this question today. So have a pause of the video if you'd like to think about this question and then restart the video when you are ready. So let's take a look at the reason that we've come up with. Now you would need to do this twice. I've just included one reason here, but you need to make sure, because the question is asking you for 2 reasons, you need to include 2 reasons in your response. And the way that the question paper is laid out will make sure that you do that, because there's a section for the first reason and there'll be a separate section for the second reason. So we have: a business plan will ensure that all elements of a new business startup will be considered by an entrepreneur before the business opens. So it basically means that nothing will be forgotten. Business planning makes sure that all elements of the business will be considered before the business takes off or starts operating. Why is that important? So this will reduce the risk of failure, as the entrepreneur will be less likely to experience unexpected costs. So that's a development point of the initial point. So that answer would gain 2 out of the 4 marks. Now, in order to gain the other 2 marks, you need to do exactly the same. So as I mentioned, the 4-mark question will appear at the end of section A. It's answered in the same way as a 2-mark section A explain question. Ensure your points are distinct from each other. Very, very important. In the above question, you could include another point linked to raising finance from the bank or from investors. So a really common reason why businesses draw up a business plan is to show the bank a business plan, because they need money, startup capital, in order to get the business off the ground. So bear that in mind. Make sure your points are distinct. That's the most common error that students make in this particular question type. So we're going to move on and look at the quantitative skills listed in the advanced information. So calculate questions can appear in any section of your exam paper, and they will be worth at least 10% of the total marks. So it's really, really important that you know what calculations will appear tomorrow, and you know the formulae, because no formulae will be given. So the calculations listed are gross profit margin and net profit margin ratios. You also would need to be able to work out gross profit and net profit if they weren't given to you, but you were, for example, given sales and cost of sales. You should know then, in order to work out gross profit, it's just cost of sales taken away from the sales revenue. You also need to be able to calculate average rate of return, and cash flow forecasts are featured. And next to cash flow forecast, it states in the advanced information you need to know about total cost, total revenue, and net cash flow. Finally, in terms of interpretation, you need to be able to interpret information from graphs and charts. So a graph or chart may be included in a specific question, but more likely in section B and C, it will be included as part of a case study. And that information is there for a reason. So make sure that if there is some information included in a table, a graph or a chart, that you refer to it where relevant in your answers, particularly on those longer 9 and 12 mark responses. So this is our second 60-second challenge, and this time we are looking at the concepts of gross profit margin and the net profit margin. And as I mentioned earlier, you also need to be able to manipulate the data if it's not given to you. So for example, here you also need to be able to calculate the gross profit and the net profit in order to successfully complete those two calculations. So again, I'm going to give you 60 seconds, so good luck in terms of completing those two calculations. So hopefully, again, you've completed those two calculations. Let's take a look at the answer. So the question was, using the information in the table, calculate to 2 decimal places the gross profit margin and the net profit margin for this business. You're advised to show your workings. So first of all, for the gross profit margin, you haven't been given the gross profit, so we need to work that out first of all. So in order to do that, we take away our cost of sales from the sales revenue. So that's 168,000 minus 75,600 to give us a gross profit of 92,400. You then divide that figure into the sales revenue, because the formula for gross profit margin is gross profit divided by sales revenue times 100, and then multiply that figure, as I mentioned, by 100 to give us a gross profit margin of 55%. Now in the question, it asked us to complete that calculation to 2 decimal places, which is why I have completed that calculation to 55.00%. So watch out for that. Now in terms of the net profit margin, we again haven't been given net profit, so there's 2 ways to work out net profit. We can take the cost of sales, the overheads, the interest and the tax away from sales revenue to give us our net profit, or we can just take away overheads, interest and tax from the gross profit that we've already calculated. So it doesn't matter which way you go, it will give us the same figure. So I've just chosen to take the overheads, interest and tax away from the gross profit, so 92,400 minus 58,262 to give us a net profit figure of 34,138. We then take that figure, divide it into our revenue. So because the formula is net profit margin is net profit divided into sales revenue times 100, and then that figure is multiplied by 100 to give us a percentage, and this time the answer is 20.32%. Okay, 2 decimal places. I've remembered to do that, so you need to remember to do that tomorrow, and make sure that your answer is clear. So our last 60-second challenge relates to cash flow forecasting, and all I'd like you to do is in those 60 seconds is to complete the cash flow forecast. Make sure you read the question carefully because there's some information you need in the stem of the question to complete it successfully. So good luck. Okay, so not a lot of time to complete all those calculations. So I'll talk through with you. If you need some more time to complete them, then pause the video, but otherwise I'll talk through the answers, as I said, with you now. So in terms of January, look at the column headings. First of all, we can see that the figures are all in thousands. So it's not £120 for January for cash inflows, it's £120,000. So we've been given the total cash inflows and the net cash flow for that month. Now, you should know the formula for net cash flow is total cash inflows minus total cash outflows. So if we know the inflows and we know the net cash flow, the total cash outflows will be the difference between the two. So in this instance, it will be £40,000. So we can check that, because if we take £40,000 away from £120,000, it will give us a net cash flow figure of £80,000. Now, in the stem of the question, it says that the opening balance for January is 0. So that's nice and easy to enter into that box. The closing balance is calculated by adding the net cash flow to the opening balance. So in this instance, that will be £80,000. The closing balance for January automatically becomes the opening balance for February. So that's worth bearing in mind. So that £80,000 is just transferred across to February. Looking at the cash inflows this time, we've been given our net cash flow and our total cash outflows for February. So again, we're just reversing our calculation where we know that net cash flow is calculated by total cash inflows minus total cash outflows. So all we do this time is add the 40,000 and the 20,000 together to give us a total cash inflows of 60,000. Because we know 60 minus 40,000 will give us a net cash flow of 20,000. So we know that figure is correct. To get to the closing balance for February, it's adding our net cash flow again to our opening balance, so 20,000 plus 80,000 equals 100,000. And we can see here that we should know that figure anyway, because we know that the opening balance for March would be the same figure as the closing balance for February. So that's a double check of our calculation there. In terms of March, we'd need to work out the net cash flow. So this time we have total cash inflows of 60,000, our total cash outflows of 80,000 to give us a net cash flow of a negative figure of £20,000. So remember, negative figures in business are in brackets. If you forget and you put a minus sign, it will still be awarded, but best practice is to put brackets. To work out our closing balance this time, because we've got a negative figure, we're adding that to a positive figure of minus 20,000, adding to the positive figure of £100,000 for March, and that gives us a closing balance of 80,000. So lots of figures there to calculate. Hopefully you've got them all right, and if you haven't, you can just listen back to the explanation so you're confident with completing cash flow forecast. Remember, with cash flow forecasting, we don't talk about profit and loss, we talk about surpluses or deficits. So if it's a negative figure, it's a deficit. If it's a positive figure, it is a surplus. And cash flow is really important because it allows a business to keep trading, to keep paying its day-to-day bills. So we're going to move on to look at sections B and C of your exam paper, and we're going to be focusing on this case study. As I read the case study through with you, think about the key points of this case study that you could include in your responses. So Qantas PLC, the national airline of Australia. So we can see straight away it's PLC and it's the largest airline of Australia. So therefore it's a really big business. Has announced that from 2025 it will be the first airline ever to start operating non-stop flights from Sydney to London. Therefore, this is going to be a USP for it because no other airline is currently completing this journey at the moment. This will be the longest flight in the world. This move has been a key objective of Qantas for the last 5 years. So it's always important when you're reading a case study, if there is an objective there, to pick it out, because it's a good way of linking your analysis or your judgment in a longer mark question to the case study if you can include it in an appropriate way in your answer. So lots of information in that first paragraph. In order to meet this objective, the company has brought 12 jet aircraft capable of flying direct to any city in the world. Each of these planes will have roomier seats and a well-being zone with a self-service snack bar and a space for stretching and movement. Customer comfort and satisfaction will be a top priority on this journey, as it will just take under 20 hours to complete. As such, high-quality digital entertainment and food will be offered to all of the 238 customers who will be able to board each flight. This will help Qantas to attract and retain customers in the highly competitive airline market. So that's a key point. Always look to see how much competition there is in the market. It often says that in a case study because, again, using that effectively in your answer will allow you to gain some context marks. Today, this journey would involve a stop, usually in the Middle East, for refueling and would take approximately 23 hours at best to complete. The whole process is often seen as inconvenient by customers. However, as yet, Qantas has not announced how much each passenger will pay to fly on this route. The investment into the planes will run into millions, so that's a key point, at a time when the business and whole industry is recovering from the effects of COVID-19, when people were unable to travel freely. So we can see an external factor there, which is affecting this industry and Qantas as well. So it's always worth looking for key elements of a case study, such as the size of the business, the amount of competition or the costs of the business, and who the target market are, the objectives, how big the business is, how many resources the business has. So, for example, if it was a retailer, how many stores, if it had physical stores, for example, and what's happening in the external environment. So we recommend that as you read a case study, that you can underline or highlight key points, but often students highlight everything. So it's really important, we think, that you annotate the case study. So if you just put little notes around it, when you then go back to look at the case study when you're answering the longer mark questions, then you can tick off the pieces of context that you've used, and that will help you to use a variety of different elements of the context in your answer, which is what the examiner is looking for. So we're going to move on to a Give Me Two activity, and this time I'd like you to come up with 2 examples of product differentiation. So you've got 30 seconds. Okay, so hopefully you've had enough time to come up with 2 examples. We'll take a look at the answers on the next slide. So this time we are looking for 2 benefits of product differentiation. So 30 seconds. Okay, we'll take a look at the answers on the next slide. So the 2 benefits of product differentiation, so we've got one linked to USP and one linked to the brand. So we've got attract customers if USP is viewed positively. And linked to the brand, we have higher prices can be charged as people aspire to be associated with a particular brand. So for example, Gucci can get away with charging very high prices for their products because people are prepared to pay those high prices because they want to be seen to be wearing or have an accessory from that particular brand. So these are the different sentences, part sentences that you will need to rearrange to form a logical chain of argument following on from one point. I will give you a clue. Number 6 is the initial point. So one impact is that it will act as a unique selling point for Qantas. So remember, we're looking at the impact to Qantas of launching non-stop flights from Sydney to London. So it's going to act as a USP. So this is how it's linked to the advanced information, this question, in terms of product differentiation. So what I'd like you to do is to pause the video in a moment and think about the order that these different statements, part sentences would fall into to make a logical chain of argument. So once you've decided on the order, then restart the video and I will talk through the correct response. So this slide shows you the correct order that you should have come up with. So let's talk through the response. So one impact is that it will act as a unique selling point for Qantas. You can see here that is an impact, as I mentioned earlier, but it is a knowledge point. So if that was the only sentence that this student included in their response, it would gain 0 marks. Because in a 6-mark analyse question, there are 3 marks available for application and 3 marks available for analysis. There are no marks available just for knowledge. So you must ensure that you answer the question in a detailed chain of argument with connectives, but also embed your answer in the case study, which is what this answer has done. So you can see the context in green and you can see the connectives in red. So we are focusing on just that one point. So this is because it is the first airline to start operating non-stop flights between these 2 cities. This may lead to an increase in the number of bookings with the airline, as customers who currently travel between Sydney and London often find it inconvenient for planes to stop and refuel. Now you can see just in that part sentence, I didn't highlight Sydney and London in green text because that information is included in the question. Therefore, that wouldn't be included always as context. You need to take context or information from the case study in order to be awarded application marks. As a result, customer loyalty may increase, which is important as the airline market is highly competitive and Qantas will want to make as many sales as possible in order to retain or improve its market share. So we have a logical chain of argument, as I mentioned earlier, all in context, and we've got nice connectives, and that is what you need to do in order to maximise your marks for 6-mark questions. In terms of the 6-mark analyse questions, just to recap then, as I mentioned, there are no knowledge marks, but there's 3 marks available for application and 3 marks available for analysis. There's no requirement for balance, so if the question asks for an effect or an impact, you can choose to include a positive or a negative point. That is up to you. However, if the question states drawback, you must only include 1 drawback in your response. Reference should be made to the context throughout your answer, as in the exemplar on the previous slide. You should include 1 point only. Now that is really key. Students often include 2 or 3 points in 6-mark analyse questions. If you can think of 2 or 3 points that would answer the question set, you pick the point that you are most confident with in terms of analysing in a detailed chain of argument. You must ensure your answer focuses on the exact question set and doesn't drift away from that question. The context must be evident throughout, as I mentioned, and you must therefore avoid writing pre-learnt chains of argument which are linked to sales and profit. If you do that, there is a danger that you're not going to move up the mark scheme. You must only include that chain of argument if it is linked to the context. So if you can embed it in the context and the chain of argument links to the question, then that is absolutely fine. But examiners often see this leads to more sales and more profit, and the profit can be reinvested back into the business. Just watch that in terms of a chain of argument. The best answers are the ones that are linked to the context throughout. So just to recap on 9-mark questions, because we've produced videos previously to help you with 9-mark questions, we suggest a 3-paragraph approach, 2 analytical paragraphs and a conclusion. The same as with a 6-mark question, the mark scheme refers to full analysis, and full analysis means that you write a detailed, chunky chain of argument that is embedded in the context. That means you need to use lots of connectives, the same as in a 6-mark analyse question and the 12-mark question as well. So connectives such as this means that, therefore, which in turn, as a result, that will flag to the examiner that you are writing in depth. You need to show balance in your analytical paragraph, so a for argument and a counter argument. The 9-mark questions are all about making a decision, so that's what your conclusion will ultimately do, but the conclusion will be based on your analysis, so a for argument and a counter argument. The conclusion should be a detailed, chunky conclusion. The same amount of marks are available for the conclusion as analysis and application. So 3 assessment objectives linked to this type of question. So no knowledge marks, but because there's 3 marks available for the conclusion, that means you should be putting the same amount of effort into the conclusion as you did with those analysis paragraphs. It won't be the same length because it's just 1 paragraph, but you really need to think about that conclusion. You could include a depends on factor if you wanted to. That is entirely up to you, but you are basically answering the question that is there. So you can use the AGM approach or the 3 W's approach. So in the conclusion, you would write, overall, I think, choose the option, should they go for whatever the business is deciding to do in the question or not. You then need to include some new evidence. So refer back to your analysis, but then some new evidence to support your judgment. That is really, really important. If it's just a regurgitation of what you've said already in your conclusion, then there's a possibility you won't gain those extra marks for your evaluation. You can include a depends on factor, as I mentioned, but make sure it's explained. And then the M stands for the most important factor. What's the most important reason why you're going for this judgment? And that might be why the depends on factor isn't so much of a concern to the business overall. An alternative approach is the 3 W's. So that stands for which option. So are you going for whatever the decision is or not? So overall, I think the business should. You then say why, so based on your analysis and new evidence, and the 3rd W is why is that better than the alternative. So those are 2 different approaches you can take to your conclusions. Often a paragraph of weakness because students get to the end of their answers and think, oh, I'll just write a couple of sentences and I need to move on. So just make sure you put enough effort into that conclusion. Give it the love that the conclusion deserves. Context should be included in every paragraph. Use the context to support your analysis and use the figures if there are any. So if there's some data in the case study, figures in a table, for example, or in a graph, it's there for a reason. Use it to help support, as I said, your chain of argument or even your evaluation. If you've completed a calculation earlier in the section, you might be able to use that calculation to help support your analysis or your evaluation as well. So common weaknesses in 9-mark questions are students listing too many points, resulting in less depth. So point after point after point. So 1 point is enough in each paragraph. So on one hand, it may be good because, on the other hand, it may be good because. So that's how you can start those 2 paragraphs. However, listing point after point after point will not move you up the mark scheme. Choose the point that you are most comfortable with in terms of analysing and include that in your first paragraph and do the same for the 2nd paragraph. Lack of depth is a key weakness in student answers. And as I mentioned, short conclusions that just repeat earlier arguments, new evidence must be included in this paragraph. So to summarise section B, it's worth approximately 35 marks. This changes each exam series. And we are suggesting spending approximately 40 minutes on this section. So in section A, you've spent 20 minutes on this section. If you then spend 40 minutes on section B, you're up to an hour, and that's an easy landmark to think about in the exam. After an hour, you should be starting section C, and if you're not, you need to do something about it. The context or the case study will be split across different items. So you see in terms of section B, it's usually just 2 items, the first case study or item A, and then item B or the second part of the case study that will follow on the story. As we stated, annotate the case study as you read. That will help you to pick out good quality context and a mixture of context that is relevant to your answer. Make sure as well, as I mentioned on the previous slide, if there's figures available, make sure that you use them in your response. The question types in section B are non-context, identify, explain or state, etc. questions. You may see a calculate question, definitely an analyse question, and then your 9-mark questions will have the command word either recommend or advise. Doesn't matter which command word appears, you can answer the 9-mark question in exactly the same way. 3-paragraph approach, a 4-argument, a counter-argument, and then a definite conclusion at the end with your final judgment. So we're going to move on to section C, and the first question type we're going to look at is the 4-mark explain question. And if you remember, 2 of these appeared in paper 1 this year. So I'm just going to quickly run through this type of question because they're not seen in every exam series, but they're likely to appear tomorrow because of their frequency in paper 1. So they're assessing AO1 knowledge and understanding and AO2 application. So they're a little bit different to the 4-mark explain questions that are seen at the end of section A. So what you need to do is include 1 point, because the question tends to ask for just 1 point, but you need to show distinct understanding of the topic area in the question and your point to answer that question in order to gain those AO1 marks, so real thorough understanding. You then need to link your understanding specifically to the case study that you have read. Very important that you include those good quality context in order to get those AO2 marks. There's no marks for analysis here, but as the command word is explain, ensure you explain your point sufficiently using connectives to get those 2 marks. And you can see here the mark scheme attached to 4-mark explain questions. So to get to level 2, 3 to 4 marks, you need to apply your knowledge and understanding to the context sufficiently. So good quality context, so maybe a couple of references or 3 references to the case study, dependent on your point that you're making. And then you need to show a sound understanding of 1 or more business concepts and issues. The questions tend to ask for 1 point in terms of the 4-mark explain questions. So make sure you show enough depth and understanding of the topic area to get those 2 marks. So the last question we are going to tackle today is the 12-mark analyse and evaluate question. Really, really important type of question because not only is it the highest mark question in the paper, but also it's the last question. So therefore you must leave sufficient time in your time management when you're planning your responses to tackle this answer or question effectively. So it will be presented as always as 2 bullet points, and analyse and evaluate will both be referred to in the question. Detailed analysis is required on both bullet points in order to reach that top level of the mark scheme, showing the interdependent nature of business. So when you are writing your chains of argument, you need to be trying to link to different areas of business, which you will naturally do if your chains of argument are detailed enough. So possibly 5 steps in the chain of argument, so 5 different connectives or even 6. If you do that and you stick to the point, an initial point, it will be in depth. Therefore, there's no need to state in your response, this impacts on the finance function, or this impacts on the HR function, to flag to the examiner the interdependent nature of business, because you will naturally do it, as I said. If you write in this way, so this impacts on the finance function, for example, sometimes that makes the analysis seem quite disjointed and difficult to understand for examiners to see the thread in terms of what you're trying to state, what you're trying to develop and analyse. Therefore, try and avoid those sentences. You must focus on the demands of the question. If the question is about sales, then this should be the focus of the analysis and your endpoints. So don't drift on then to profits, for example. The conclusion should answer the question set. Reread the question when you reach your conclusion to make sure you are answering the exact question there. This time, for paper 1, it referred to which of the 2 options should the business have introduced first to improve productivity in the short term. So the 2022 paper that you sat a couple of weeks ago referred to productivity. But instead of which will have the biggest impact, which is what we've traditionally seen in 12-mark questions, there was a lot to contend with here because you had to make a judgment about the introduction first to improve productivity. So that should have been the focus of the analysis all the way through in the short term. So if it's a similar type of question, just reread it to make sure you're addressing all the different elements that are focused on in that question. In your conclusion, it's a really important paragraph. You should refer to both options. So make a clear choice, but weigh up one option against another and clearly justify why you've come to your conclusion, or that judgment. So the AGM acronym that I went through earlier, so answer the question, justify with new evidence, new supporting evidence, really, really key. Don't just regurgitate what you've said already. A depends on factor, explained, and the most important reason why you've come to your choice could be one structure that you talk about or you follow in your conclusion. Alternatively, you could follow the 3Ws approach, which I mentioned earlier, but just add on a depends on factor and what's the most important reason for your judgment. You must include good quality context throughout your whole answer. That is absolutely key. There's 3 marks for each of the assessment objectives here. So knowledge and understanding, application, analysis and evaluation. So context should be included in each paragraph. We're recommending a 3-paragraph approach, 2 analytical paragraphs and a conclusion, the same structure as the 9-mark question. However, in terms of your analytical paragraphs, you could include 1 point that links to the first bullet point in your first analytical paragraph. So a benefit, for example, of that point, whatever the point would be. And then in your second paragraph, you just need another point, which is showing the benefit or analysing the benefit of the second bullet point to the business. So there's no need to write fors and againsts. You can include drawbacks if you want to, but make sure the key is to have detailed chains of argument. So you could have just a for argument for the first bullet point, a for argument for the second bullet point. Then in your conclusion, you choose whatever the question is asking you to do. So in terms of this question we've seen for paper 1, which of the 2 bullets should they introduce first? You explain with new evidence. So you've got some evidence there because you haven't used all your evidence earlier in your analytical paragraphs because you've avoided listing lots of points. And then when you're weighing up one against the other, you then put a drawback in of the alternative bullet point that you've rejected. So that's how you can get a con into your answer without writing pro, con, pro, con, pro, con in your analytical paragraphs, because the examiner's just looking for full analysis. If you do that 4 times, that's really unnecessary. You could just do it for one paragraph for the first bullet, 1 paragraph for the second bullet in terms of 1 for, 1 for, and then conclude by suggesting how one bullet is better than the alternative in light of the question. There's no right or wrong answer either in this type of question. So if you come out of the exam and your friend has got a different judgment to you, it doesn't matter. What we're looking for are the skills in terms of what the examiners are looking for, are the skills that you are showing in your response to meet those assessment objectives. I've talked about avoid listing lots of points, write in depth about 1 point in each paragraph and refer to different aspects of the context in your analysis and conclusion and different areas of business. Now, I did mention there are 3 marks available for knowledge and understanding. You can start your answer with a definition if you want to, but equally there's no need. If you are writing in depth and you are showing you understand business, you will naturally get those 3 knowledge and understanding marks. So you don't need to include an introduction about what you're going to do in that response. Just plan. You must plan because you're going to be writing for 12 minutes. You must plan, but then just get straight on into your answer. So in light of the first bullet point on one hand, bullet point 1 would be good because write your detailed chain of argument in context, and then second paragraph. On the other hand, the second bullet point would be good because, and then get onto your conclusion. And that's the same principle with a 9-mark question. No introductions and definitely no definitions because there are no marks available for knowledge and understanding. And this concludes this GCSE AQA 91 Business Paper 2 walkthrough, where we have looked at the different sections that will appear in your paper tomorrow. We've looked at the different types of questions that will also appear, and we've looked at exam skills as well as core content taken from the advanced information. So we'd like to wish you the very best of luck in your paper.